There comes a time in the life of the church when what happens inside the private rooms emerges externally, not through official communiques, but through the words of those who are actually there. Not filtered words, not agreed-upon statements, but personal reflections, written a few days apart, when the experience had already been internalized and silence had done its work. This is what happened after the recent consistory, when on January 20th, Joseph Zen decided to publish a clear judgment on his experience on his blog, a judgment that, precisely because of its frankness, was subsequently taken up and broadcast by Gloria TV. The text was not intended as an official statement, nor as a political stance. It was born as a first-hand account. Zen does not speak from hearsay. He writes as a cardinal who participated in the consistory, who listened, observed, and spoke. And it's precisely this that makes his words difficult to dismiss as mere polemics. His narrative isn't ideological, but experiential. And precisely for this reason, it's uncomfortable. According to what he writes, one of the first critical points concerns the actual management of the work. Due to time constraints, the cardinals were asked to choose only 2 out of 4 topics to discuss and vote on. The outcome is well known: synodality and evangelization. Zen doesn't question the legitimacy of the themes themselves, but the practical effect of that choice. In his opinion, the selection made an entire part of the meeting useless, transforming what should have been a broad discussion into a limited, channeled exercise, lacking the freedom that a consistory should guarantee. But the crux of his writing isn't just what was discussed, it's how. Zen describes a form of encounter that explicitly recalls that of the recent synodal process. Roundtables, informal exchanges, fragmented discussions. The time for plenary discussion, that is, for the moment in which a cardinal speaks in front of everyone, publicly assuming responsibility for his positions, would have been extremely limited. According to Zen, this has profoundly affected the quality of the debate, because the Church is not a sociological laboratory, and the College of Cardinals is not a working group. It is a body called to speak clearly, even at the cost of dissent. In his story, another element weighs particularly heavily. Before the debate even got into full swing, several interventions and documents were presented by figures linked to the synodal apparatus and Roman dicasteries. Zen lists them precisely, not for the sake of controversy, but to describe a sequence that, as a whole, gave him the impression of a meeting that was already well-defined. Not a blank page on which to write together, but a pre-established framework within which to move with limited margins. This is where one of his strongest statements comes from. Zen writes that the consistory appeared to him as a continuation of the synod on synodality, not a separate event, autonomous in its own right, but an extension of a process already underway. This perception, in his story, isn't the result of an abstract suspicion, but the consequence of what he's seen and experienced. And it's precisely for this reason that, while defining his reading as a sort of conspiracy theory, Zen doesn't back down from his fundamental judgment. Thus comes the controversial word. Zen speaks of a hijacked consistory. He doesn't use this term lightly. He adds an explanation: the impression that the meeting was controlled by members of the apparatus, those he calls the foot soldiers of the previous pontificate. The expression is harsh, but not accidental. It indicates an organized dynamic, not just chaos. It suggests the feeling that someone worked to ensure the consistory followed a precise direction. From here comes the most serious accusation, formulated in the form of an observation. According to Zen, everything possible was done to prevent the cardinals from freely expressing their opinions. And immediately afterwards, in his writing, he asks a question that needs no comment. If this is true, isn't it perhaps the exact opposite of the purpose for which the consistory was convened? It's a question that goes to the heart of the matter. Because a consistory isn't a decorative event, it is, by its very nature, a place for frank, even harsh and even uncomfortable discourse. Zen says he openly criticized the synod and the measures inherited from the so-called implementation phase. He says this without extenuating circumstances, acknowledging his use of harsh language. He doesn't specify every word he said, but the gist is clear. It wasn't a soft criticism, but a clear stance. And here the story becomes almost personal, yet remains sober. After his speech, he writes, he felt cold stares, a sense of distance, not an open protest, but a silent isolation. It is in this context that Zen uses a strong yet ancient image in the biblical tradition, that of the black sheep. He defines himself this way, not out of self-pity, but to describe a condition, being the only one who speaks in a certain way, in a context where many prefer to remain silent. However, his story doesn't end with isolation, because Zen adds a detail that changes the perspective. Inside and outside the classroom, several brothers, whom he defines as traditionalists, have expressed appreciation for him. This detail is crucial. It indicates that dissent is not absent, but submerged. It doesn't emerge in official moments, but circulates in the margins, in private conversations, in words spoken in hushed tones. And it's precisely this dynamic that makes his January 20th post more than a simple personal outburst. It's evidence of a silent rift between what's said publicly and what's actually thought. The fact that the text was picked up and broadcast by Gloria TV helped bring this reflection beyond the blog's narrow circle of readers. But its strength lies not in media coverage. It's the writer's position. Zen is not an outside commentator. He's not a pundit. He's a cardinal who participated in the consistory and who, days later, chose to leave a written record of what would otherwise have remained unsaid. Taken together, this story raises a question that goes beyond the individual consistory. It concerns how the Church manages its moments of discernment. He speaks on behalf of a conscience that has decided not to remain silent. And in a church that often invokes parousia, the courage to speak out, even a single voice can become a signal, not necessarily of rupture, but of truth. What do you think? If you liked the video, comment, Amen. God bless you.